So, welcome everybody to this evening's Dhamma talk, in this series of talk for this meditation retreat. So here we're giving talks both for the yogis here, who are just so close to enlightenment. And all those people who come and sit in the back, who are getting off on the peaceful, enlightened energy of all the yogis here. So hopefully you're all enjoying this series of talks. But this evening's talk is a special talk. This is no ordinary talk. This is one of the deep talks about one of the most fundamental insights of the Buddha. No self. And it's wonderful to see so many no-selves here tonight. Listen to my talk. You aren't here. It's like talking to an empty hall. So I don't have to worry about what I say. So this is one of the great teachings of the Buddha on no self. And it comes in all sorts of layers of profundity. Just from the ordinary ideas of non-self and non-identification into the deeper understanding of the nature of who you are. Who are you anyway? Listen and you might find out. But first of all, when we have the teaching of non-self, it can first of all be on the ordinary level of our daily lives. In the ordinary level of our daily lives, it can solve so many problems in our daily lives. There's so many things, if we could only realize it's no self, that we could actually let go of and be at peace with. We don't have to worry about it. The problem is that each one of us, we have what we call an identity, who we think we are as our identity. And all you yogis coming here, you're going to have an identity crisis. When you find out everything you thought you were is not real. So then you find out exactly who you are and find out what you are. And this is the process of deep meditation. But first of all, I had an identity crisis years ago. But think of me. I was born in England. I was trained in Thailand. I lived in Australia. And now I'm in Malaysia. I am very confused. Because it's true. You know, I've been here into Malaysia many, many times. And so I've known many of you for a long time. I count you as my friends. So when the plane lands in KLI airport, and you see all these wonderful people waiting for you outside, you think, oh, isn't it wonderful? I'm coming home. And then I go off to Penang, which I'm going in a couple of days. When I see all those devotees in Penang, I think, oh, isn't it great? I feel like I'm coming home. Then after Penang, I go to Singapore. When I see all the devotees in Singapore, I've had such a wonderful time in Singapore, I think, I'm coming home. And then I go off to Thailand, where I spent 9 years in these villages, and I think, oh, I'm coming home. And then I go back to Perth, where I've been living for the last 21 years, and I think, oh, isn't it nice to be home? And every now and again you go and visit with family in England, and you think, I'm going home again. I don't know where I belong. Even many of you know that the English and the Australians, one of the things they always battle over is cricket. They love these cricket matches. And when it's Australia playing England in the cricket, it's not just a game, it's war. It's serious business. So sometimes people ask me, who do you support? You were born in England, but now you live in Australia. Who do you support? And I always say, I support the referee, the umpire. Because I don't know which team to support. Whether English or Australia, I don't know. But the point is, if you start to identify with one side, then you suffer. If you start to identify and you think, yes, I'm English, when the Australians win, oh, that's very hard. If you think you're Australian and the English win, oh, that's very hard. If Malaysia is playing soccer with Singapore, if Singapore wins, oh, that's very hard. So Why is it that we identify with these things? And when we identify with these things, not only is it unreal, untenable, but also we suffer quite a lot. Are there any feminists here? Are you a feminist? Because if you're a feminist, you think that you belong, or that you think that you are a woman. Are you a woman? If you identify with being that, you suffer enormously. Are you a man? All of those of you vegetarians here, is that who you are? Think about it. What is a vegetarian? It's someone who eats vegetables. So what's a humanitarian? It must be someone who eats humans. There's a lot of English language. So humanitarian, someone who eats humans. But so the point is, when I look at my body, is my body a male? Is my body English? When you actually look at these things, I cannot really say who my body belongs to. Because for the last, 7 or 8, 9 days or something, I've eaten Malaysian food. So probably most of my cells in my body have been fed by Malaysian food. So does that make me a Malaysian now? Probably my body is mostly Malaysian. If you stay in Australia, if you go and visit my monastery and do a retreat for 1 month in Australia, you've eaten so much Australian food, you must be Australian too, aren't you? What makes you who you are? Is it your body? You know, for many, many years we always thought that our soul, lived in our heart. And then when Dr. Christian Barnard, whatever his name was, did the first heart transplant, it shocked a lot of people because they wondered, actually, if you had a heart transplant, who would you end up being? The original owner of the heart or the new recipient? Which self would dominate? Of course, we all know now that if you get somebody's heart, you're still your old self. But what would happen if we had a brain transplant? If I died and I donated my organs, including my brain, to you, would you end up sort of being able to tell funny stories? Would you be Ajahn Brahm or would you be yourself? Who would you be? Now, it hasn't happened yet, but I will tell you what would happen. You will end up being the same person you were before. Not the brain, but the body. Because you are not your body. And anybody who has got at least a little bit of insight, a little bit of understanding, especially if you look at your past lives. Now that gets very confusing if you remember your past lives. All you girls were probably boys before. All you boys were probably girls. All you people who were Buddhists were probably Christians before. All the Christians were probably Muslims. All the Muslims were probably Buddhists. Who are you? When you look over many, many lives, it gets very, very difficult to identify with being one particular gender or one particular nation. You've been all nations, all genders. You swap roles over many, many lifetimes. The point is that if you can only remember your previous lives, how could you identify with this particular race, this particular gender, or even this particular religion? If you could only remember your past lives, there could be no wars. There could be no conflict anymore. How could you go into war against your brothers and sisters, literally your own flesh and blood? It's only when we identify with being a particular race or nation or religion or gender that we can have all this conflict. So never think of yourself as a Malaysian, a Singaporean, not even a human being. You are just this beautiful mind inside of you, which goes from life to life. You can see that if you develop a bit of depth in your meditation. You are not your body. So if someone comes along and calls you camel face, you ugly camel face, Why do you get upset? You say, that's just my body. That's not me. You know that sometimes, though, people identify with their bodies, just like people identify with their cars. Some people drive a Rolls Royce, and they think they are a Rolls Royce. In other words, they think they get proud, they get arrogant, they get conceited. Look at me. But is the driver the Rolls Royce? Sometimes all you've got is an old beat-up bicycle. Does that mean that you are the bicycle? Sometimes we should differentiate the driver from the vehicle. And then we don't have to worry about the vehicle so much. If your car gets dented and gets scratched, you can still use it to get to Chempaka Buddhist Lodge every evening. It doesn't really matter. It's useful. That's good enough. So if your body gets scratched, if it gets beaten up by old age, if it gets sick, as long as it can be used, that's good enough. Are you your body? The Buddha said again and again and again. Be careful. Don't identify with being your body. If you identify with your body, you know what you do. You look at yourself every morning in the mirror. Am I pretty this morning? And if you're not as pretty as the person sitting next to you, you suffer a lot. It's amazing how much suffering, especially women, have with their body. Many years ago, a man rang me up. His daughter was depressed, suicidal. She had a problem. He tried all these counsellors. Nothing worked. So out of desperation, he decided to see a Buddhist monk. I was the last resort, probably because he ran out of money. You know, monks are cheap. Is that one of the stories in the book? About this lady, you may have heard the story before. This lady who rang up, an American lady rang up this American monk and said, I hear you teach meditation. He said, yes, madam, I teach meditation. How much do you charge? He said, nothing, madam, it's free. She said, well, you can't be any good then, and hung up the phone. That's what happens sometimes if it's for free. People think that it's worthless. So these days we never say it's free. We don't say it's free. What is it? It's priceless, yes. So the teachings here today are priceless. They're not free. So in this particular case, the man brought his daughter. She's a 14-year-old girl. And the father never told me the problem. So I had to coax it out of this girl. It took me about 25 minutes. I said, what's the problem? Why are you depressed? And finally she let me know. She said, my nose is too big. And that was actually making her so depressed. It was ruining her studies, ruining her social life. She was suicidal because she thought she had a big nose. Now you may laugh upon that, but you little girls, if you remember when you were a teenager at that age, you probably can understand what she was going through. And at that time I wasn't a very skillful monk, so I decided to be my scientist who I was before. So I looked at her nose and I mentally measured it. And I compared it to all the other noses which I'd seen in my life. And I did a quick statistical analysis, and I told the girl, I said, madam, so your nose is average. It's not the most beautiful nose I've ever seen, I must confess that, but it's certainly not the most ugly. It's just an ordinary nose, that's all it is. And that didn't help at all. She went away as depressed as when she came in. I tried my best, but sometimes you can't succeed. But it taught me, why is it that we worry so much about our nose, or about our eyes, or about our hair? How many people go to the beauty salon and spend a lot of money? How much do you spend on your hair? I don't spend very much at all on my hair. This is smart. I don't care what I look like. Even though you can imagine what it's like being a monk in the West. I used to have some great fun dressing up in these robes in the West in the early days. I was visiting some of my relations once in the Midlands of England. And I was walking down the street with my cousin, and all these people were pointing at me and laughing. I didn't know why until I found out there was a circus in town, and I thought I was one of the clowns. A true story. I don't mind. Because if people call you a clown, what do? You laugh, yes. When the world laughs, you laugh as well. Then no one is ever laughing at you. They're only laughing with you. Now that's a very powerful piece of wisdom. If you make a fool of yourself and everyone starts laughing at you, you laugh as well. Then no one ever laughs at you. They only laugh with you. And the point is, it's only because we have this idea of a self. That I am my body, or I am a monk, or I am this and I am that. If you don't hold on to that idea of a self, then if you've got a big nose, it doesn't really matter, because you are not your nose. You are not your pretty face, or you girls. All you boys never marry a pretty girl. It's true, never marry a pretty girl. Because usually the pretty girls, they don't need to develop their character. They just rely upon their good looks. They can't cook. They're not charming. And the looks don't last very long. So you're on a loser from day one. So the point is that why is it that young men, they look at a girl and they like it just because she looks pretty? Because they're marrying a body. They're not marrying a person. If you don't know the idea of non-self, you're going to get in big trouble in life. It's the same with girls marry this hunky boy. He may look very strong and fit now, but imagine what he looks like when he's 60 or 70. And you're stuck with him then. So, the thing is, you're not marrying a body, you're marrying a person. So that first of all, that you can't identify with the body as being you. Do you understand that? Do you really understand that? What happens if you go to the doctor and he said, you've got cancer? Are you upset? Why? It's not you haven't got cancer. Your body's got cancer, that's all. Not you. The problem is when we say, I have got cancer, my body's got cancer, I'm dying. That's when you find out if you're attached to this body. Only when it's threatened do you find out. It's like one of my disciples, he went to the doctor, he told him he had cancer. He only had 1 month to live, said the doctor. His disciple, only 1 month to live? That's terrible. I don't think I can pay your bills within 1 month. Okay, I'll give you 2 months to live then. Well, business is business. No, the point is, it's only the body. It's not you. And it's important to understand a person is different than their body. Because then, if you see a sick body, when you go to a hospital and visit a friend who's sick and who's dying, never talk to the body. As I said the other day, you don't go and say, how are you feeling today? That's what the doctors and nurses say. You talk to the person. Because sometimes the body changes, comes and goes. They're not the body. It's the same when I went to teach in prisons. One of the terrible things in jails was that everyone in a jail thought they were a prisoner, a criminal. And I told them, look, you are not a criminal. You are a person who's done a criminal act. And there's a lot of difference between being a criminal and someone who has done a criminal act. There's this old story in psychology about these two boys who were with their mothers in a supermarket checkout in parallel aisles. One boy dropped a carton of milk and the milk splashed all over the floor. About the same time, in the next aisle in the supermarket, another boy dropped a jar of honey and it went smash on the floor too. The mother of the boy who dropped the milk said, you stupid child. The mother of the boy who dropped the honey
said that was a stupid thing you did. The mother of the boy who dropped the honey said that was a stupid thing you did. It's a world of difference between those two reactions. One said the whole boy was stupid, that one act made the person. They made literally a self out of that person. They were stupid. The other mother realized there was much more to that boy than that one act. They weren't defined by that act. They were a person who'd done a stupid thing. Now, psychologically, that's important, incredibly important. If you call a person a criminal, as if that's all they are, there's nothing else. If you say they're a person who's done a criminal act, you're acknowledging there's more to them than just that one or two things which they did. It's one of the reasons why people who commit crimes keep on committing them. It's because they do identify, they make themselves from that act. They literally become criminals. In the jails, I don't know if any of you have visited people in jail, in Australia, they wear a special uniform, like green prison outfit. I think in the US they wear bright orange. Whatever it is, their uniform, their clothes tell them, yes, you are a criminal. The way they're treated tells them they're a criminal. Where they stay tells them they're a criminal. Day after day, every moment of the day, it's reinforced in them they're a criminal. So they do become criminals. As long as they were treated as people who have done a criminal act. But people first, the crime second. Then there's an opportunity for them to pay their debts, to rehabilitate themselves, to let go of the criminal part and return to being a person. The way we look at ourselves is important, which is part of the Buddha's teaching of anatta. When we believe that we are this criminal, we actually become the criminal. One of the fundamental stories, which I use very often, I learned when I was a school teacher. It was the example, or the experiment which was done in the UK, it must have been about 40 years ago now. They had streaming in the schools, like Class A, B, C, D, and that sort of stuff. In one school, there were 2 classes of the same year. So, at the end of the year, they gave an examination to all the children of that year, some 60 children. However, usually they would publish the results. This time they didn't. The head mistress, the principal, and 2 psychologists were the only ones who knew what the real results were. But the head mistress, she split the classes. The child who came first went into the same class as the children who came 4th and 5th, 8th and 9th, 12th and 13th, and so on. The children who came 2nd and 3rd went in the same class as the ones who came 6th and 7th, 10th and 11th, 14th and 15th. They split the classes up as evenly as they possibly could. And they chose teachers for the next year who they thought had equal ability, classes with equal amenities. They made everything as equal as possible, trying to split the classes up evenly. They only made one difference between those 2 classes, and it was they called one Class A and the other one Class B. That's all. And of course, the parents assumed, just as the children, even the teachers assumed, that the children in Class A were chosen as the top half from those exams, and the children in Class B were the ones who came in the bottom half. The point was, though, they were absolutely even. But because the parents thought that, they reinforced that message. Some of the children went into Class A and they said, well, I don't know how you've done this, you've been very lazy, but well done, here's some extra pocket money. You have a few extra video games as well. The children in Class B said, I know you've been working hard, but it's not good enough. Work harder, do more homework, get extra tuition. Because they thought, because their child was in Class B, they thought they failed. Even the teachers they taught Class A kids and Class B kids differently. And the children themselves believed, if they were in Class B, that they were the bottom half. Class A was the top half. And after 1 year of conditioning, when they gave them the next exam at the end of the next year, the children in Class A did so much better than those in Class B. In fact, they did just as you would expect if they had have been the top half from the year before. Literally, they became Class A children, and the other half literally became Class B children. It was a very telling and chilling result. To become a Class A child, you just need to have it reinforced for 1 whole year. It's nothing to do with your ability. To become a Class B child, you just have to have it reinforced, that's all. And you become a Class B kid. So now you understand why that child in the supermarket, you stupid child, you become a stupid child. Someone in jail, you criminal, you become a criminal. Or you meditators who think you're a nodder. You're not a nodder, you're a meditator who nods sometimes, otherwise you always become a nodder. So if you say to me, I can't meditate, I say, you are just a person who hasn't meditated yet. So be careful just how we make these selves out of our beliefs. I've got a big nose. If you think like that, you are a big nose person. And so be careful how you limit yourselves in life by not understanding anatta. Whatever you've done in your life, you are not that act. If you've done something terrible, if you've abused someone, you are not an abuser. You're a person who's done something terrible, but you are not that terrible act. You're more than that. Now you understand how you can have forgiveness in life. Forgiveness is seeing you much more than that fault we've done in our life, which means that because you've got much more than that, you can free yourself. How many people get really guilty and they become that guilt? So they can't sleep at night. All the time they're thinking about that thing they've done. How can we become free of that? You've actually literally built a self out of that terrible thing. And because you've done that, sometimes you can't sleep. When I was counselling this lady who was dying of cancer, I was counselling her for many weeks. And one day I asked her, she was only about a month or so to go before she died. I said, what's the worst thing you've ever done in your life? And she said, well, I don't know if I can tell you that. I said, come on, tell me. And I said, I wouldn't tell anybody else, but actually I've told thousands of people. I'm sure she wouldn't mind, because it's a great story. So what's the worst thing you've ever done in your whole life? She must have been about 70 years of age. And then she looked at me and said, okay. So once, she said, once I kissed another woman's husband. Is that all? And I thought, if that's the worst thing you've ever done in your whole life, that's not that bad. So she only kissed once another woman's husband. And I thought, if that's the worst you've done, that's pretty good. Has anyone else done worse than that? But the point was, because she never told anybody, because she had never confessed, because she hid it in herself, she suffered immensely because of that. It went all out of proportion. That's what sometimes does, where you can make such a big self of these things that can actually cripple our whole lives. It's great telling other people these things, especially telling a monk, because I can use it as blackmail to make funds for my monastery. No, I'd never do things like that. Never do things like that. But the point is that sometimes, why do we bother with these things? Can't we think we're more than those things? You're more than your body. You're more than your mistakes in life. So exactly who are you? Are you the criminal? Are you the good person? Are you the yogi? Or are you the lay person? Are you the monk? When we let go of those identifications, it's amazing, we can be free. Okay, we've got a big nose, but that's not all that we are. We made a mistake, but we're more than that. We can be free, we can move on, if we know we're much more. In particular, when you realize you're not your body, you will never be afraid of sickness and death again. Your body gets sick, your body may get cancer, but not you. You are more than that cancer. If I'm not right, when you die, you can come and send your ghost to me and haunt me and say, Ajahn Brahm, you were wrong. And I say, no, I'm not. The point is that why do we worry so much about this body? You are not your possessions. You are not these things. But sometimes people think they are these possessions. They get very worried that the possessions are being taken away from them, especially when you die. So I say all fear is when we attach, which means there's a self in here, thinking that those things define you. Every now and again, being a monk, I meet some very interesting people. On this one occasion, I was giving a meditation class in Sydney. This meditation class was in a very, very expensive part of Sydney. I think it was in Double Bay. And as I was giving the talk, this lady was actually looking at me. She was leering at me. Hey, hey, she was saying with her eyes. I thought, what's she on about? So I just carried on just giving a talk. And afterwards she got very upset at me. And the reason was that she was actually a famous television star. Everybody in Australia knew her, except me, because I don't watch TV. And she was so upset that I never recognized her. When you become famous, it's like that. People get very, very upset if you don't recognize them. This was a true story. It was recorded in the newspaper. The first George Bush, when he went to England, the first time after he'd been elected as President of the United States, he went to a cocktail party or some reception in London, and this woman came up to him, said hello, and said, who are you? He said, I'm George Bush, the President of the United States. He said, oh, come on. But I am. Oh, no, you're not. Don't give me that. And he was. He got very upset. Because that's called pride. When we attach to thinking we are the President of the United States, or we are the beautiful woman, or we are the great monk, or we are whatever. You're not those things. Those are temporary roles we play. So at the very least, can we let go of these things? When you stop trying to make this self, this personality, this person who you think you are, then actually you can be somebody different. You can make a mistake every now and again. Why is it that we hide our mistakes? We don't allow ourselves to make mistakes. We're afraid of mistakes. It's because of pride. We think, I'm the person who doesn't make mistakes. In my monastery we have a rule. It's allowable to make mistakes. Hands up if there's anyone in here who has never made a mistake. Anyone who puts your hands up, that's another mistake you just made. Why is it that we don't want to admit our mistakes? This pride again. It's great to be able to admit your mistakes. It's just so freeing. Once, I hope you haven't read this story in my book. It's the story of the hammer. Many years ago, when I was walking in my monastery, I found a hammer laying out in the grass getting rusty. It had probably been out there for many days. Now, I think many of you know in a Buddhist monastery, everything we get is donated. It comes from people like you who, because of your faith and inspiration, you decide, oh, the monks are building a monastery. Here's a hammer, here's a trowel, here's some nails, here's some wood. So you can help us build a monastery. And some of my disciples were not wealthy at all. Sometimes they literally had to save up for weeks to buy a hammer for us.
So one of our understanded rules, if anyone gives you something, you have to respect it, care for it, look after it. Just because you didn't, buy that hammer, it doesn't mean you just leave it around in the bush to get rusty. I thought that these monks in my monastery need to learn a lesson about caring for the gifts of the faithful lay people. It's hard to get money. You work very, very hard. And you give some things to monks and they just leave them around as if they're not worth anything. And so I called a meeting of all the monks. And it's not one of the jokey talks. I really blasted my monks. And I told them about responsibility. If you're going to live on the charity of others, you've got to look after those things. And actually that no one laughed on that talk. Instead, everyone was sitting bolt upright. Many of the monks were white. I really let them have it. But when I'd finished admonishing them, I thought at least one of those monks, the one responsible, would put up their hand and say sorry. I thought maybe I'd admonished them too hard and they were afraid. But I thought, no, that's no excuse. And I left that hall despondent. I'd lost my faith in my fellow monks. Why couldn't the perpetrator, confess? I wouldn't have done anything wrong. I told them off, but at least they confessed. I'd have forgiven them. But the fact they never did confess, that's what really hurt. You thought at least out of trust and faith that somebody would actually own up. And so that was one of the most depressing times, leaving that hall. Thinking that I couldn't trust my monks anymore. But as I went outside the hall, it was only 2 or 3 steps after I'd gone out, I started feeling even worse. Because I suddenly remembered who had left that hammer out in the grass. You got it was me. I'd completely forgotten. And even when I was blasting other people for leaving the hammer out there, I still couldn't remember it was me. And so it was one of the most embarrassing times of my life as a monk. I had to go back in that hall, tell the monks to sit down, and sort of confess a double mistake. First for leaving the hammer out and for telling them off for doing it. But I laugh, and so it's a big deal. I confess it every time I tell that story. I made a mistake. Isn't it wonderful to confess it and have it out in the open? You feel so free. The point is, there's nothing wrong with making some mistakes. Don't be so proud. If you made a mistake to your wife, tell her. If a wife made a mistake to the husband, tell her and ask for forgiveness. Sorry, don't be proud. Don't have this ego business. If you have an ego business, you always get into trouble. There's this doctor in Australia some years ago. Doctors in Australia earn a lot of money. The specialists, maybe 10 or 15 minutes consultation, I don't know how many, $1,000 or something. Incredible amount of money. Because there's only few of them. So sometimes they don't know how to spend their money. So this doctor bought this huge, big, powerful Ferrari in Sydney. It's a waste of time having a powerful sports car if you can't drive it fast. And the problem is that in the cities, just like probably in PJKL, there's too many policemen. So the only thing he could do was, one of the nice things about Australia, there's many open areas in the country, and there are very few policemen out there. So he drove very carefully outside of the metropolitan areas, outside of the suburbs. And when he was in the open countryside, he put his foot on the accelerator and roared the engine, and he started speeding, way above the speed limits. But hey, he'd earned this car. He was having fun, and why not? But as he was speeding around making all this terrible noise in this quiet countryside, he spied a farmer out the side of his eye. And the farmer shouted at him, "Pig!" And he thought, who's he to call me a pig? I've got a right to drive. It's a free country. So he turned around and shouted back at the farmer, "Who are you calling a pig?" In those few seconds, he drove into a pig in the middle of the road. In the middle of the road. That's right. The farmer was being kind, shouting out, "Pig!" in the road. But because of his pride and ego, he thought that he was a pig. He wrecked his car and spent many weeks in hospital. And all because of his pride. Similar thing happened to me, but not quite as bad. I wasn't driving a Ferrari. That's not what I was with, but I was with my mother once. In Ealing Broadway in London, she was taking me to the railway station to go to actually an appointment. It was a Saturday afternoon, many people in this busy shopping centres. And as I was walking along the road, somebody shouted out at me, "Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna." Now sometimes in the West that's a term of abuse for a Buddhist monk. Because they think they're all just Hare Krishnas. And because my mother was with me, I decided to be assertive. I decided, look, I'm fed up with being mistaken as Hare Krishnas. So I went up to this guy who was wearing a beanie and wearing this jacket, and I said, "Sir, look, I am not Hare Krishna. I'm a Buddhist monk and you should know better." And then he took off his beanie and said, "I know that you're a Buddhist monk." He had his little ponytail. "I'm the Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna." Now why do these things always happen to you when your mother is right beside you? Oh, I'm so embarrassed. It's really unfair. But the point is, if you don't have an ego, you don't get embarrassed. I was embarrassed. I had an ego then. So the point of the story is that it's all because of our sense of self. Number one, you aren't your body, so forget about getting old, getting ugly and dying. It's okay. It's not you getting old, ugly and dying. It's your body. And that's only a temporary home for you. You're just renting it, just like a rent-a-car. If you crash, doesn't matter, just hand it in, you get another one next week. You are not your success or failure. If you make a mistake, that's not you, so forget about it. If you fail once, never think you're a Class B person. If you are, you'll never be able to succeed in life at all. Don't believe your mistakes. In other words, don't take them as you. And if you can do just that much, you'll have a lot of happiness in life. But that's not the whole of the Buddha's teachings of anatta, because now I'm going to go much deeper. Yesterday, I was starting to talk about seeing things as they truly are. Now I'm going to give you an exercise, a teaching which I haven't done yet here. I want you to watch your mind as we go through this exercise. I hold up the nearest thing to me and I ask you, what is this? What is it? Anyone got an idea? The cup? What else is it? Yeah, what else can you see? Anything else? What else is it? Porcelain, anything else? Yeah? Keep on looking. Okay, I've done enough now. Now the point is, when I first held this up, when I said, what is it? You all thought maybe cup. But because I asked you to keep on looking, you started to see something more. Porcelain or white. In fact, the longer you looked, the more you saw. This is what we mean by insight. This is not just cup. That's the first word which comes into your mind. It is much, much, much more than that. Who is this? Anyone who says it's Ajahn Brahm is much, much more than this, than Ajahn Brahm. That is just the name, the label. Too often, when we actually look at something and we say cup, all we're doing is repeating what we were taught at school by your kindergarten teacher or teacher in grade 1 when they pointed at the book, mummy, daddy, tree, house, car. But it's much more than that.
When you hold up a cup and you look at it, the longer you look, the more you see. After you get rid of the superficial perceptions, cup, mug, porcelain, then the mind is free to look deeper and to see deeper into the reality of this. In fact, the longer you look, the more you see, the more you uncover. There was a professor in Harvard at the turn of the century. He was a famous, what's called a polymath. A polymath is someone who hasn't just got expertise in one subject, but many, many subjects. He was advertising in the university for more research assistants. And there's one young man who later wrote the biography of this professor, volunteered and was given a test to see if he had what it took to be an assistant to this great professor's research projects. The professor reached up for a jar on the shelf, took out a pickled fish, put it on the bench and said, "Look at that, and tell me when you've finished looking at it." And the research assistant didn't know what the guy was talking about. He said, "It's a fish. Keep on looking." He did the same demonstration I just did for you, but on a deeper level. And this young man started looking at the fish. The longer he looked, the more he saw. After an hour, the professor said, "Are you finished yet?" He said, "Amazingly, no. I'm still discovering new things in this fish." At lunchtime, the professor said, "Are you finished?" "No, go have lunch, come back this afternoon." For 3 days, that research assistant just kept on looking. After 3 days, he hadn't exhausted all the things he saw in that fish. The professor said, "I can use you." That's a person who has insight, who has wisdom, who can see much deeper into things than just the superficial reality. All of those of you who are married, do you know your partner? Do you know the person you've lived with for 10, 20, 30 years? If you think you do, your relationship is dead. If you look, you'll be able to see deeper and deeper things. The longer you look, the more you see. They're much more than what you think they are. Who are you? When you look at yourself, you may think, girl, Malaysian, boy, meditator, Buddhist. But soon you push aside those labels to look much deeper. This is called the process of insight. All those labels I've been talking about so far are just that, superficial things you've been taught to believe in. This is why if you believe in them too strongly, if you believe, say, you're no good at mathematics, you will be no good at mathematics. It's just belief, that's all. I tried that out once. When I was a school teacher, there was a boy in the class. I found out the year before he was bottom in mathematics. I was teaching mathematics in this class. I gave this boy extra attention, encouragement. At the end of the class, I would go up to this boy, every class I taught them, ask if he'd understood the lesson, encouraged him, made sure they got extra attention. It was an experiment of mine. I admit it was very unfair on all the other children in the class to give extra attention just to one. I wanted to find out whether my theory was correct. I gave extra attention, extra encouragement. And of course, you know what happened. At the end of the year, he was the boy who came top. And I realized what I suspected was true. There is no such thing as someone being no good at mathematics. All it needs is encouragement. But if they think they're no good, they will be no good. That's why each one of you meditators, you come into the interview and say, I'm no good at meditation. I say, yes, you are. Because if you think you're no good, then you will be no good. So I encourage you. Sometimes you just got some of you have just managed to watch the present moment for a few seconds. I thought, oh, that's wonderful. You're just that close to nimittas. I must admit I do exaggerate sometimes in interview time, but it's encouraging you. It means that it's going to work. And that's a job of a coach, and that's what I'm doing. You should coach yourself. In other words, encourage yourself that yes, you can do it, yes, you can do it, yes, you can do it. And I found great success. People do it that way. If any monk comes up here and says, the time for enlightenment is over, you cannot become enlightened these days. If he keeps saying that, then no one ever will become enlightened. So we say, yes, you can become enlightened. They say, can girls become enlightened? If I say, no, only boys, not only would you get very upset at me, but it's also not true. And also, you never will become enlightened. I say, yes, it's possible. And then you find it does happen. Can lay people become enlightened? If someone says no, then I'm actually stopping you becoming enlightened. When I say yes, I'm opening the doors, the possibilities. That's how important the belief is. So, when we're actually looking at the sense of self, we look deeply. You are not your perceived abilities and inabilities. You can do whatever you like if you really believe in it. It takes time, but it works. So when we look deep inside ourselves, we see that we are got all types of possibilities. The mind is so strong and so free. That way we never hold on to any sense of inability. We can detach from our fear of not being able to succeed at anything. When we go deeper and look at this thing we call ourselves, we go deeper than our body. When we're saying cup, 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 it's much more than just the porcelain. It's more there. When we look at ourselves, we understand this is not just our body. We're not just our hair, our nose. That's what sometimes happens. Sometimes monks would go to Ajahn Chah, I've fallen in love, I want to disrobe. So what are you falling in love with? He said, the girl over there. What part of the girl are you falling in love with? Her hair, her nose, her eyes? In the time of the Buddha, there was this nun who was just so beautiful. It was called Upalawana. Maybe some of you have heard her name. Literally means the blue lotus. She was an arahat at this time, perfectly enlightened. But this boy fell in love with her. And so he followed her into the forest. So it wasn't Upalawana. I think this was, was it Wajiri? I forget now, but it wasn't Upalawana. It was another very, very beautiful nun. And this boy followed into the forest and proposed to her. He said, oh, you're so beautiful. You are so lovely. Please marry me. And she said, no, I'm a nun. He said, look, why are you wasting your life like that, sitting in meditation all day? I can look after you. I will care for you. I love you so much. And she said, well, what part of me do you love? And he said, your eyes. Your eyes are so deep. Like the eyes of a soft doe, so blue, so deep. I can just sink into your eyes every time I look at them. I'm trying to be romantic. It's been a long time since I said these things. But the nun said, it's my eyes you like. Are they? So, she put her finger in her eye socket, pulled one out and gave it to him. Here you go. You can marry this. And he went, what have you done? And as soon as she was a woman without one eye, he didn't love her anymore. And that was this wonderful story in the suttas about what do you fall in love with? Is it the eye? If you love someone's eyes, then you can take it out, give it to you, leave you alone. If they love your hair, you can cut it off and give it to them as a wig. So, you are not the body. So, that's why Ajahn Chah used to say, look, what are you falling in love with anyway? Sometimes when people fall in love, they say, oh, I love everything about you, my dear. You know the story coming next? That one, yeah, it's one of Ajahn Chah's favourites because I was there at the time. You may have heard this one, but I can't resist telling it.
As Ajahn Chah was in the front passenger seat of the car, as the driver taking him into, I think he was going to the station. I was in the back with this young American novice called Gary. And there was our translator, who was an American monk who spoke perfect Thai. And then halfway on the journey, Ajahn Chah turned round at this young American novice, looked him in the eye and said to the translator, "You're thinking about your girlfriend, aren't you?" He was only recently ordained. And his jaw dropped almost to the floor. Ajahn Chah was reading his mind. He was thinking about his girlfriend. And when your teacher turns around and says that, it really hits you where it hurts. And Ajahn Chah looked at him with compassion. He said, "Never mind, we can help you." He said, "Because you're living so far away, if you ever get lonely, why not ask her to send something of hers, something personal, so whenever you miss her, you can take it out to remember her." And he said, "Is that allowable?" And Ajahn Chah said, "Yes, it's allowable, you can do that." And he thought, Ajahn Chah understands romance. That turned out to be a fatal mistake. Because what Ajahn Chah said next took the translator many minutes. I can still picture him now laughing his head off in the car. Because what he said, Ajahn Chah says this: next time you write to her, ask her for something personal, so you can always remember her when you feel lonely. Ask her to send you a bottle of her shit. Whenever you miss her, take the bottle out, open the cap. My love. Ajahn Chah was so gross. But so true. Isn't that the case? You say, "Oh, my darling, I love every part of you." Which is why I tell young lovers, don't squeeze her too hard. It's like a toothpaste tube. So be careful. So you're not your body, for goodness sake. So there must be something much more than that. So who are you? When you get rid of the body, what candidates are there for a self left? Now, when we actually understand rebirth, when this body goes, there's a stream of consciousness. But what actually is this consciousness? The knower and the doer. These are those two parts of the mind I've kept on talking about. The doer and the knower. Basically, the sankhara and the vijnana, for those of you who know 5 khandhas, the 4th and 5th khandha. The will. Now, as a monk, I have spent a lot of time meditating and contemplating this thing we call will, choice. And a few times it scared me what I found. Once I'd given a talk at Perth the previous night. The following morning I was just rummaging around the library. Just basically, killing time basically. And I saw in the shelves of the library a talk on the same subject which I had delivered 7 years before. I decided, having a bit of free time, to check to see how my Dhamma talks had progressed over 7 years. So there was a cassette tape, I put it in the cassette recorder, turned it on and listened to it. As I listened to me giving this talk 7 years previously, just a chill went down my back. I could recognize myself repeating, word for word, paragraphs, exactly the same as the talk I'd given the previous night. Exactly the same. And I thought, what's going on there? I thought that when I spoke, I had completely free choice of what I said. The coincidence was so strong, I realized I had no choice what I was saying. It couldn't have been free choice.
Otherwise it would not have been the same. And that reminded me of a time when I was a student. That particular time I was a member of the Psychic Research Society of Cambridge University. Not only did I was a member of the Psychic Research Society of Cambridge University. Not only did we investigate ghosts, which was a very interesting pastime for a student, but also we had other wonderful lectures by witches. In particular, every year we had a hypnotist come and give a demonstration. I tried to see if I was a hypnotic subject, but I wasn't. But you'd always find one student who was very easy to hypnotize, and the poor fellow afterwards wished he hadn't. Because on the first time they hypnotized this poor student, put him into a trance. They made him do all sorts of stupid things, but the highlight was the hypnotist told his student that when the hypnotist would touch his right earlobe, this student must stand up and sing in a full voice the British national anthem. Now that's not something you would do in the middle of a lecture theatre of fellow students, especially alone. And the hypnotist told him, I'm now going to take you out of trance. You will not remember anything I've told you, but later on when I touch my earlobe, you will stand up and sing God Save the Queen. And of course, being in the audience and seeing this, we couldn't wait until this hypnotist touched his earlobe. The hypnotist was a good entertainer because every now and again he'd move his finger to his earlobe and then take it away again, keeping us on tenterhooks. But then finally he did touch his earlobe. And this young man stood up in the middle of the lecture and started singing God Save the Queen. And it was hysterical. We all started laughing. And even though we were laughing uproariously, this student carried on until he finished the whole national anthem. And we asked him afterwards, why did you do that? Why did you humiliate yourself by singing God Save the Queen in front of everybody alone? And what was chilling, he said, he gave a reason. For him, he had freely chosen to sing. It showed me that what you take to be a free choice very often is not free at all. Your will has been totally conditioned. You did not have any choice to come here this evening. That's why you're here. You think it was you, your will. After a while, when you look very deeply, you think there's a whole web, a network of cause and effects, which make you do the things you do. Some people say, does that mean we shouldn't put any effort in our lives? My answer is, you've got no choice. You have to put forth effort. Your will is not you. You see that when you go into deep meditation, when you go beyond the will, when all will stops in the deep samadhi meditations. What that does is shock you. I gave that simile a few days ago of the driverless bus. When you try and find the seat of the will, where is this will coming from? Who is the being who is pulling all the levers, who's at the driving wheel of you? Who chooses? When you find that, you find it's empty. There's no one at home. Ooh, that's scary. But what it does, it makes you understand a lot of the teachings of the Buddha, which before you may not have been able to understand. It's called anatta, non-self. You find that which we call choice and will is completely conditioned. You are able to be brainwashed, and all you yogis have been brainwashing you for the last 7 days. Brainwashing to believe you can meditate. Brainwashing you to get a nimitta. And I've succeeded with many of you. I've conditioned you. And it was Ajahn Chah who conditioned me. Ajahn Brahm conditioned Ajahn Chah. And it all comes back to the Buddha. To show you what conditioning is, you only have to look at advertisements. Why do you have that fashion you have? Are you really free when you go into the shopping malls of what you actually choose to eat and choose to buy? I thought I was never influenced by those silly advertisements on the TV. Until once, when I was a student, I saw this advertisement. I still remember it. I've talked about it in my lectures many times. It was St. Bruno tobacco. Because in this advertisement, I was a student at the time, 18 years old I think. In this advertisement, this ordinary looking man, not particularly big or handsome, he was walking along the street of a town somewhere, alone, no friends, no girlfriends. But then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a pipe, and put in some St. Bruno tobacco. As soon as he lit the pipe, the aroma went into a bank which he was just passing. In the bank behind the counter was an incredibly gorgeous girl. And as soon as she smelled the tobacco aroma, she was smitten. She jumped over the counter and followed him, enraptured. It went past a newsagent. The same thing happened. An equally gorgeous chick stopped what she was doing and just ran behind him. After only 2 minutes of the advertisement, this ordinary-looking bloke was actually being followed by the most amazingly beautiful girls you could imagine. Because St. Bruno tobacco. And it's a really stupid advertisement. Who would actually believe that? I tell you who believed that. Me. Because I brought some of that tobacco. It never worked for me. Otherwise I might not become a monk. I don't know. No, I would have been a monk. Been a monk anyway. But why did I do such a stupid thing? I had been completely conditioned by the advertisement. Anyone in the advertising agencies knows how true that is. Those adverts work. But the point is, with advertisements, you don't realize they're working. You think that you can see and watch those advertisements and you're perfectly immune. Now you understand how your will is conditioned. You are not the person choosing. However, at this particular stage, because you've listened to the Dhamma, because you've actually heard some Buddhism, I'm sorry, but it's too late. You've already been conditioned to get to Nibbana. Because once those ideas are in there, you start talking about jhanas and nibbana, you've got a little taste of those things, you can't forget those things. That's why some people ask you, this is a deep teaching which comes from the realization of non-self, you are not the one who makes these choices. They say, can an arahat decide to come back? Can even a stream winner decide to have more than 7 lifetimes so they can come back and help others? The point is, there is no choice. Can't happen. You think, why can't it happen? When you understand what choice is, what will is, it becomes impossible. It's not up to you. You are part of a process, a natural process which happens whether you will it or not. You are just like a flower when it comes the time for you to bloom. You bloom. The flower never decides, I'm going to put it off till tomorrow, or I'm going to bloom today. When the nature tells it to bloom, it blooms. The same way when nature tells you you're going to get sick, you get sick. When nature tells you you're going to die, you die. When nature tells you you're going to get enlightened, you get enlightened. It's not up to you. Isn't that wonderful? Because it's not up to you, you can let go now. You can let go and stop worrying. Just allow it to happen. Oh, isn't that wonderful? That's the nature of the knower, of the doer, sorry. There's another part to the mind called the knower. Consciousness. Are you the one behind the eyes? Are you the one behind the ears? Are you the one behind the mind, the one who knows? In deep meditation we look upon that knower, and as we look more deeply, like looking at the cup, we see it more and more depth until we understand what it truly is. Sometimes it's like looking at a beach. When you look at a beach, this whole stretch of sand, it looks continuous. That's because you're not looking closely enough. It's the same when you look at your conscious experience. It looks like it's continuous, that you have been conscious, aware all day, without a break. But when you look closer at the sand on the beach, you find it's made up of particles of silica. When you look closer at your conscious experience with the still mindfulness created by samadhi, you find you're not a continuous flow of consciousness. You're like the particles of sand, moments of consciousness, one after the other. If you look even closer, you can see those particles of sand are not even touching. There's a space between them, a gap. If you look even closer, you can see there's gaps in your moments of consciousness, with nothing passing from one moment to the next. You see that consciousness is just a flow, that's all. Nothing there. Emptiness. You aren't even the knower, let alone the doer. That is the last citadel of the self, of the illusion, to see you're not the one who knows, you're not the one who does, but this is a process which goes on every moment of the day, which goes on from day to day, which goes on from year to year, which even goes on from life to life. A process. If you want to investigate that process more fully, you can look upon the Buddha's teaching of dependent origination. That's exactly what it is. Dependent origination was defining the process. But you can know it for that much. All your moments of consciousness are discrete, particular, like pieces of sand, with nothing going from one moment to the next. That's called truth, Dhamma. If you see that when there's no one in there, here, then you become enlightened. Then you can really let go. Why can you let go? Because there's no one in here doing anything. That's why you can let go. The Buddha often said, when there's a sense of self, there's a sense of ownership. That's what the self does. Big egos do a lot. Big egos own a lot. That's why the biggest egos want to own countries and become presidents of the United States. The big ego, because that's what an ego does. It exerts power and ownership over what it thinks it owns. What do you own? You don't even own your body. What do you own? You don't even own your mind. Then we can let our body go, we can let our mind go. Isn't that wonderful? Scary for some, wonderful for others. I'll finish off with one of my favourite stories. Many years ago, when I was a young monk in Thailand, not so much a young monk, maybe 7 or 8 years as a monk, my teacher Ajahn Chah was getting sick. Eventually he was very sick and went into a coma which lasted for many years before he died. But this particular occasion, because he was sick, the Western monks in this monastery close to Ajahn Chah's monastery decided we would build him a sauna. The saunas were actually allowed in monasteries from the early days. We were going to build a sauna for 2 reasons. Number 1 was actually to look after our teacher, to increase his health. But number 2, and I must admit probably the most important reason, was as an opportunity to get our teacher to visit once a week. Because when he visited, he'd always give a Dhamma talk. So by building a sauna, we were guaranteed one Dhamma talk by Ajahn Chah every week. And that made it very worth it. So he would come every week to give a Dhamma talk, and we'd look after him in the sauna afterwards. On this particular occasion, Ajahn Chah gave this amazing Dhamma talk. I was so inspired after the talk, so full of just happiness and inspiration about the incredible Dhamma he was teaching, that for once I decided I would not go to the sauna and help my teacher bathe. There are other monks who could do that. I decided to go around the back of the hall and meditate, because I was just so peaceful, so inspired. So I went to the back of the hall, and as usually happens if you've heard a good talk, you get so much inspiration. I got a wonderful deep meditation. Really blissful, really still. When the meditation finished and I opened my eyes, the first thought which came up was, I wonder if my teacher, Ajahn Chah, is still in the sauna. Perhaps I can do some service for him. So I got up and started walking to where the sauna was in the monastery. I found I was too late. Ajahn Chah had finished his sauna, was already dressed, because I met him coming in the opposite direction. He was coming with 2 Thai men on the way to his car to go back to the monastery. So we were about to cross on the path. Ajahn Chah and his 2 Thai men and me coming alone in the opposite direction. Whenever you meet a great monk like Ajahn Chah, you've got to be very careful, because he can read your mind. And this was one occasion when he did read my mind. You could tell the way he looked was penetrating. You could feel him going right into you. He quickly saw I'd had a very deep meditation. That's why he started reading my mind. He suspected it by my smile. And he saw I'd had a very powerful deep meditation. So he decided to try and enlighten me. One of those marvelous occasions with your teacher. He saw you had the samadhi. He just needed to get the right trigger to enlighten me. So he looked me deeply in the eye. And he said, "Brahmavangso." He caught me. And he asked me this amazing question. He said, "Brahmavangso, why?" He asked me the question, why? Probably the deepest question you can ever ask anybody. And I answered without hesitation, "I don't know." Because I was a stupid young monk. I didn't know what he was on about. What do you mean the question why? And he laughed, like a great teacher does. He thought it was very funny that all his Western students who got all these great degrees from big universities were more stupid than a buffalo. So, he laughed, and he stopped laughing, and he looked at me seriously again. So he stopped me laughing, and he said, "Brahmavangso, I'll tell you the answer. So if anyone ever asks you again the question why, this is the right answer." Do you want to know the answer to the question why? This is what he said. He said, the answer to the question why is, there's nothing. He looked me in the eye again. "Do you understand?" I said, "Yes." He said, "No, you don't." And he walked away. That was one of the amazing questions. We're talking about anatta. There's nothing. Nothing there. No one at home. No one to worry about. You can let go of everything. So that was a great answer to the question why. Anatta. There's nothing. Do you understand? No, you don't. And that's a great way to end this talk this evening on anatta. There is nothing, and you still don't understand. But one day you might. Any questions on non-self? You got one over there. Do you want to get the microphone? Here you go. There's a microphone in the center there. Don't be embarrassed. There's no one there.
Ajahn, can you please explain further the process in the law of dependent origination?
More dependent origination. Okay, I'm going to sum it up very briefly.
because there's two halves to dependent origination. For those of you who know this, it's like delusion. It gives rise to karma formations, which gives rise to rebirth consciousness, which gives rise to nama rupa, the objects of consciousness, which give rise to the 6 sense bases, which gives rise to contact, which gives rise to feeling, which gives rise to craving, which gives rise to attachment or grasping, which gives rise to the rebirth, or rather which gives rise to becoming, which gives rise to rebirth, which gives rise to craving, which gives rise to attachment or grasping, which gives rise to the rebirth, or rather which gives rise to becoming, which gives rise to rebirth, which gives rise to all the suffering in life. Now, we combine those two because all it's doing is showing how there's a process of rebirth without a self. So I'm going to combine it with delusion as the cause. We have both the karma formations, is will, the doing, but also the karma created by craving and attachment. From craving plus will, we get the process of rebirth. In the same way, if you say want to go to New York, the only way to get to New York is, number one, have the will to get there, you want to get there, and number two, have the means to get there. The passport, the visa, the air ticket. In the same way, if you want to get reborn somewhere, you have to want to get reborn and have the means to get reborn. The will plus the craving. The will plus the karma. The craving plus the karma. The karma is your air ticket. The will is your craving, your desire. That is what creates the rebirth. That's what creates the process. To will and to have the karma to achieve what you want. There are some of my disciples in Perth who have told me they want to get reborn as a cat. What do you want to be reborn as an animal for? They say, I've looked at cats in Perth. They do not need to go to work on a Monday morning. They can sleep around all day, and they get fed the most delicious of food without having to work for it. They don't have to worry about a mortgage. They don't have to worry about anything. I said, be careful. Most of the cats in Australia go to the vet for an operation which you might not agree with. But be careful, if people want to get reborn as a cat, they probably will do. So what do you want to get reborn as? If you have the karma and the will, that is what happens. So because of that, you understand what the process of rebirth is. This will and this craving. There was an interesting article I read some years ago, and it actually indicates a very important corollary of dependent origination and Darwin's theory of evolution. Because sometimes some people, like Christians, would say, look, evolution, Darwin's theory, just cannot work. Because things mutate by chance. There hasn't been enough time for chance to work. But it's not chance which creates evolution, which creates mutations in species. It's craving. It's craving, which the Buddha said is the most important thing, which keeps the evolution mutations happening. And what made that very clear, it's not just independent origination, what made it very clear was an article I read, which is a fascinating little piece of science, from England. As you may remember, there was a British Prime Minister called Margaret Thatcher. One of the things which she did was to close down many uneconomical coal mines in Britain. One of the mines she closed down was a pit which was very close to the town of Swansea in South Wales. In fact, the pit was actually right next to the suburbs. When she closed down the pit, she fenced it off, but there were still people who get in there. In particular, people would use, there's a very
terrible thing they did. They used a pit for the following purpose. If their pet cats had too many kittens and they couldn't give the kittens away, they would throw the kittens down the mine shaft, just to dispose of them. A terrible thing which some people did, but it got common. Many people threw their little kittens down the shaft to get rid of them. But you know that when little babies, when they fall from big heights, sometimes they don't die. Little kittens are incredibly agile and soft. Many kittens apparently survived, because a few years later, the British Coal Board or whatever went down that pit just to check on the safety. Even though it wasn't being used, they had to make sure it was maintained. And when they went down that pit, they got the surprise of their lives. It wasn't just that many kittens had survived, but those which had survived had mated and formed a completely new species of cat with big ears. I remember seeing a photograph, this huge cat with big ears, and they were blind. And because they knew that could only have started happening when the pit was closed, which they was only in 1980 something or whatever it was, or 70, well, I forget when Margaret Thatcher closed the pits, and maybe 10 or 15 years, had a whole new species with big ears and blind, because in the darkness underground, you don't need eyes anymore. You can't see anything anyway, so they all were blind. But the ears were so important that through craving, to see other cats, actually rather to hear them, so that they were either enemies or they were potential mates, to catch their foods, in the space of a couple of generations, they'd grown these huge ears. That is how evolution happens. The craving is so strong, it will actually change things. It's amazing how these things happen. You don't understand how important craving is. And that's actually dependent origination. Because of the will, the craving, this is actually what keeps the process going. If you really want, it will happen. Even in a negative way as well. You have to be careful of the power of the mind. This experiment was done in Bristol jail around 1901. There was a poor man who was condemned to death by hanging. He'd only done a minor crime, but there was much capital punishment in those days, over 100 years ago. Even in those days, scientists were into some sort of psychology. A couple of scientists got permission to perform this very, very gross experiment. They went to that man's cell on the night before his execution. They told him the law had been changed. They were lying. They said he'd still have to die, but instead of by hanging, he would have his throat cut in the following morning. And this poor man was left alone in his cell to think about what was going to happen in a few hours' time. In the morning, in the hour before dawn, the guards came for him to take him to the place of execution. They bound his hands tightly behind his back. They put a blindfold over his head and led him into the execution place. There, a priest gave him the last words, the last rites, whatever it was. The sentence was read out, and then one of the guards, the executioner, drew a knife across his throat. He collapsed on the ground and died. The point was, the knife was blunt. At the same moment, they drew this blunt knife across this man's throat, didn't even scratch him. One of the psychologists turned on a tap because the place of execution was no more than the prison washrooms. The man heard the flow of liquid, felt the cold steel on his neck. He'd been thinking all night he was going to have his throat cut. That was enough for his mind to believe he was having his throat cut. He fell down and died. With nothing wrong at all. The power of the mind is that strong. If you think you're going to die, you will. Craving is incredibly strong.
There's a similar case a few years ago in the United States. A man was working for a trucking company, would drive refrigerated trucks. On this occasion, it was a Friday afternoon. He was cleaning out his truck. The wind caught the door and locked him inside. He banged on the doors on the side of the truck. Unfortunately, no one heard him. He was the last man out of the yard. He was stuck inside for the weekend. Unfortunately, he realized you cannot withstand such a long time in sub-zero temperatures. He was in a refrigerated truck. He soon realized he was going to die. They found him on a Monday morning, dead. But with his dead body was these notes which he'd written. He realized very soon that he was stuck in there and could not withstand sub-zero temperatures. So he decided to write a minute-by-minute account of what it was like to freeze to death, because he thought that at least his death would not be in vain. Maybe medical science would gain some understanding of the process of dying by freezing. This account was already well known by science, by medicine. They're a classic account of what happens to you when you freeze to death. The only strange thing about the whole experience was he didn't know this, but the refrigeration unit wasn't turned on. It was normal temperatures. Because he believed he was freezing to death, he literally froze to death. Even though it was normal temperatures, all the symptoms manifested just because of the power of the mind. So in Australia, in the indigenous populations of Aborigines, they used to have a custom. If anyone had transgressed an important law of the tribe, the elders would meet in a circle with the miscreant in the middle, and if they judged him guilty, they would take a bone and point the bone at the Aboriginal miscreant. The person who had the bone pointed at them would invariably die within a few days. It's called pointing the bone. The mind is so strong. Craving is paramount. That's what keeps evolution going. If Malaysian people want to be tall, you'll find the young people getting taller and taller. If you want to be paler and paler, you'll become more pale and pale. That's what happens. Any other question? Yeah. Okay, you're saying nature and anatta. So anatta is part of nature. It's just understanding the truth, the nature of things. It's just like understanding physics is nature. And when you go deeper into physics, you find actually the truth of anatta right there in science as well. Which is wonderful that many people, many scientists have actually shown. They had this amazing experiment which was done by Professor Libet, L-I-B-E-T, got the name right. He did this experiment because they managed to find with magnetic resonance scans of the brain what they call the readiness potential. What this is actually is when you're about to do something, the part of the brain becomes bright under magnetic resonance. So you can actually see when you want to do something, when the brain starts the process of doing, or when the process of doing is started. So Professor Libet had his students do a simple exercise, just flexing your wrist. With the other finger, they had a little button. When they decided to flex their wrist around them, they press a button. So what he was doing, he was a very clever scientist. He managed to account for reaction times. He wanted to find out what actually started first. The will to move, the the student's perception of their will. Because you know when you decide to do something. It's very clear that now I decide. They could press the button at that point when they decide to flex their wrist. So which happened first? The moment of their will, or what they thought was their will, or the readiness potential in the brain. Having done this very simple experiment thousands of times, he found out the very striking and unexpected conclusion. The brain turns on first, before you have conscious will. By the time you have conscious will, by the time you think you're deciding to shake your head, it's a process which has already started, which cannot be stopped. Benjamin Libet, L-I-B-E-T. Fascinating piece of science, proving what the Buddha said. What you take to be will and choice, by the time you see it happen, you can't stop it. It's already happening. It's not the originator of the process. The brain's already turned on, and will happens next. Does it make sense when you think about the ordinary idea of choice? It does to any psychologist. So that's nature. The natural truth is anatta. Scientists can see that. As far as cloning is concerned, I think cloning would be a great idea, because I like to clone one of me to stay in Chandako Buddhist Lodge, one of me can go to Singapore, one of me can stay at my monastery, and the other me can have a nice time in a cave somewhere in the Himalayas. That would be the real me. But people sometimes misunderstand about clones. If you cloned me, even the clone would not necessarily look like me. I don't know if you saw this piece of science. I always keep up on the science because it's great, because it gets rid of a lot of false opinions. They cloned a cat. I think it was done in Britain. They got a cat, they got some of the genetic material, and they cloned a cat, another cat from that cat. The second cat, guess what it was called? It was named Copycat. Scientists do have a sense of humour. The point was they had a picture, I saw this picture of cat and copycat. Copycat was a clone of cat. They looked very different. The coloured markings on their fur were very different. What they actually proved by that little experiment was just because you clone someone, even their physical form is not necessarily exactly the same. You can tell physical differences from them, let alone mental differences. But the point is, if you clone another person, it's just like cloning a car. Every Hyundai is a clone of the other one. Every Mercedes is cloned. They look the same if it's the same model. But they don't drive the same. It depends upon the person behind the wheel. In the same way, if you clone a body, it may be the same genetic material, but it's the person behind the wheel. In other words, the stream of consciousness which has come from a previous life, with their karma, that makes a difference. So if you're cloning somebody, it just doesn't really matter. It's just creating another body, that's all. Another vehicle for the stream of consciousness to take birth into. That's all. So in Buddhism there's nothing wrong with it at all. You can clone as much as you like, but you just get people looking the same, or maybe not quite the same, but they can be completely different people. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Question over here. Please come up. Yes.
Yeah, John. This question is from one of the ladies, Yogi. What is your view regarding the Indian guru called Sai Baba?
What is my view concerning the Indian guru called Sai Baba?
People have claimed to see him all over the world, but his passport shows that he has not left India at all. Does this mean he has reached a certain stage of jhana to enable his spirit to travel around? It is also said that he is the enlightened human being. Your comments, please.
Aha. Okay, first of all,
He's seen in many different places of the world, but he hasn't left India. He must be on the TV or on the internet. No, that's not really saying that. What actually happens is that sometimes, like, people can have visions of great beings. You can see such things. But is he enlightened or not? It's so hard to know who's enlightened or not. But that will be explained and revealed in tomorrow night's talk. Tomorrow night's talk on enlightenment. But the point is that it does not matter the person, the vision, what they look like. That is not the important part of enlightenment. The wonderful thing about the Buddha was it's not a guru tradition where we worship the form, the vehicle of the Dhamma. We worship the Dhamma as well. This is why when the Buddha died, passed away, just before he passed away, someone asked him, who are you going to appoint afterwards? And he said, I will appoint no one. Let the Dhamma and the Vinaya be your teacher. A very deep and powerful piece of advice. You're not worshipping the person, you're worshipping what they teach. So you don't worship Sai Baba, you worship what he teaches. In other words, the teaching can appear all over the world. The vision of the person is not important. The person will eventually pass away and die. But the teaching, that's important. Which is why that we listen to what anybody says. And if that makes sense, if it accords with our experience, if it leads to peace and harmony, that must be truth. So we never actually say a person is really enlightened. When you understand anatta, what can be enlightened? Is your nose enlightened? Or is it your flesh is enlightened? Is it your mind is enlightened? When you understand anatta, the mind is just a process. There's no thing which is enlightened. Enlightenment is. As it says in the Buddhaghosa's Visuddhimagga, the path is, but no traveller on it is seen. Nibbana is, but not a person who enters it. It's a very beautiful poem. The path is, but no traveller on it is seen. There are no yogis, just a process. The path is, but no traveller on it is seen, no self. Nibbana is, but not the person who enters it. Anatta. Understanding that, we understand that whether it's a teacher of a Buddha or Sai Baba or Ajahn Chah, they're just vehicles for truth. So we don't worship the vehicle, we only worship the truth within it. He who sees the Buddha sees the Dhamma. He who sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha. It's anatta. So the Bodhisattva is the Buddha is the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is the Arahat is the Bodhisattva. These are just vehicles for truth. The vehicle passes away. The vehicle doesn't get reborn. The truth is what gets reborn. Do you understand? Sort of. Maybe. Go on.
Why do our minds sometimes deceive us? Say, it's boiling hot water. When you first touch it, it feels cold before you feel hot.
Why does the body deceive us? It's because, the mind deceives us. Because we only see what we want to see, what we expect to see. That's why all of you are so afraid of ghosts. If you see a ghost, you expect to see, and that's what you do see. If you know what ghosts really are, they're just such soft, cuddly little things. You don't believe me, do you? So you won't see that. Why is it? This was an interesting piece of research again. I think it was Dr. Raymond Moody did this book, A Life After Life or something. Again, reporting out-of-the-body experiences or near-death experiences. People who died in his hospital but were brought back to life again. And because I think he was in some hospital in the US with in a poor area, it was a multicultural hospital. And so there were people from all different races and religions in the hospital. And what was fascinating was when people had out-of-the-body experiences, when they went to the light and they saw what was on the opposite side of the light, if they were Catholic, they would see the Virgin Mary coming to meet them on the other end, telling them their time was not ready yet. They had to go back. They went back, and when they woke up again, they'd seen a supernatural being, the Virgin Mary. They were devout Catholics from then on. But if it was an Anglican, they saw Jesus himself. They swore they saw Jesus. But when it was a Hindu, they saw the Lord Krishna. And they're absolutely certain it was the Lord Krishna. If they were Mahayana Buddhists, they saw Kuan Yin, the goddess of mercy. Or maybe they see Amitabha, who sent you back, your time's not ready yet. If they were atheists, they saw Uncle George. And they swore it was Uncle George. I saw him, I was there. Now the point was, what is going on? Like, is it really so up in heaven? They have all these great beings, Jesus, Virgin Mary, the Lord Krishna, sort of Kuan Yin, all like in some sort of waiting room, and they look, is a Buddhist coming? It's your turn, Kuan Yin. Here comes an Anglican. Come on, Jesus. That's ridiculous, isn't it? It can't happen. There's no offence meant to any religion. So what's happening there? I'll tell you what's happening, because I know these beautiful nimittas and what happens. When you die, when you go up to that light, everyone sees the same. But if you're a Catholic, you expect to see the Virgin Mary. And that's what you do see. You add that detail onto that experience. If you're an Anglican, you expect to see Jesus. And that powerful nimitta becomes Jesus. If you're an atheist, it becomes Uncle George. The mind is so strong, it will fill in the details of what you expect to be there. And that's what one sees. This is the power of perception, and why people have different religions and faiths, and they swear that what they saw was that. Any sort of Christian who sees a deva would see them with wings. They haven't got wings. It's just we add them on, because we expect that's what's there. If a Buddhist sees a deva, you see them differently, what you expect to see. It's amazing how we add what we expect to see. Even with psychic powers. If you really want your teacher to have psychic powers, you'll see one. But is it really there? Or have you added it? There was this one occasion when Ajahn Chah was in northeast Thailand. It was the Uposita day, which is the day when people would go to the temple, the Sabbath day. It was during the rainy season retreat, the holy 3 months of the year. So one of his disciples decided to go and listen to the sermon that night. They drove through a heavy monsoon rainstorm. But when they got into the temple grounds, their car got stuck in the mud. It was pouring down with rain. They wondered what to do when they saw Ajahn Chah come out from the forest. Even though he was getting wet and muddy, he pushed the car so the car could make it all the way to the temple. Even a great monk could be so humble and so compassionate to push the car of a disciple. And they saw that themselves. You can imagine their surprise when they got into the main hall and saw Ajahn Chah was up there giving a talk. Completely dry. It was a miracle. Ajahn Chah had performed a feat of psychic power. Even though he was giving a talk, he'd seen a disciple in distress, trying to do something good. And he formed some sort of body to push the car out from the mud. That story soon went all around that area. It was one of the famous stories of the psychic powers of the great teacher Ajahn Chah.
Unfortunately, it wasn't true. Because it was Ajahn Chah's cousin, who was a novice at the time. I know this monk very well. He's said it many, many times. He said, it wasn't Ajahn Chah, it was me. I saw that car, I was only a novice, I wasn't in the hall, I decided to give it a push, I just happened to look like my cousin, Ajahn Chah, that's all. Now that was a true story. But even though he's told that to many people, people still would not accept it. They wanted to see a miracle by Ajahn Chah so much that once they got a half of one, they made it into a whole one, and it stuck. Now this is one of the problems with miracles, because we want to see them so much. We make them into miracles. It's called hagiography. Hagiography, look that up in your dictionary, Hagiography, hagiography. It's where people make their teachers into saints. It's where many of the miracles of Jesus came from, even some of the miracles of the Buddha. Added by the disciples, to actually to make our teacher just as good as the teacher over there. So be careful of hagiography. That's why the Buddha said the only miracle, the greatest miracle, the only miracle which he praised was the ability to teach the Dhamma and to relieve the suffering of others. That truly is miraculous. I don't know if did I answer your question. You're still standing there, sir.
No. Anyone saw Ajahn Brahm?
Anyone saw Ajahn Brahm? No. He disappeared. So thank you for that. Any other questions? Yeah, wow, phew, wow. Okay. Here we go. Okay, a person who has terminal cancer, who won't give up, who keeps struggling and spends millions of dollars for this treatment or that treatment, is he craving for existence? It is a craving for existence. So sometimes we think, would my millions of dollars be better used for some other purposes than keeping this old body going, propping it up? It would be much better for that friend to give all those millions of dollars to charity, together with whatever organs are left, and give up this body, and they'll get a much better body next time. Wouldn't you do that if you had an old car? If you had an old car, and this was falling off and that was falling off, and it was very hard to get started in the morning, and it kept on stalling on you, and it was really uncomfortable to sit inside it because it was one of those old models, even without an air conditioner, or it maybe had one a long time ago but it didn't work anymore. Would you spend millions trying to keep it going? Or wouldn't you sort of trade it in, or put it into scrap and get a new model? So wouldn't that be the right thing to do? If you get old, trade in your vehicle for a new one. Let it go. It is craving. A lot of time it's a fear of death. Because we may be Buddhists and believe in reincarnation, because we're Christians and believe in eternal life after death. We may tell other people and try and convert them, but we don't really believe it ourselves. If we really did believe it, then the Christians will be lining up to die, to get to heaven quickly. And if you've done lots and lots of good karma, you think, oh, when they say terminal cancer, say, wow, whoopee! I've only got a short time left now. No more pain, no more suffering. Great, going. If you really believe you're going to heaven, wouldn't you do that? You know one of my stories, I tell this at funerals, it's in the book, about these two old people. The two old people story. Two old people, they've been married for many years. And so like many old people, they're devoted to each other. They died within days of each other. Have you seen that happen? I've seen that happen. People married for so long together, they died within days of each other. And so they appeared in heaven together. And an angel met them. And they took them to this beautiful mansion. Did I tell the story already? No, it's in Singapore, I think. And they took them to this beautiful mansion overlooking the cliffs, overlooking the ocean. In this world, you'd have to be a billionaire, a movie star to afford a mansion like that. And the man looked at that mansion and said, that's a very expensive piece of real estate. I don't think I can afford the government taxes, the assessment, I think it's called, is it? I don't think I can afford the assessment on that, the rates. And the angel said, don't worry, sir, there's no governments up here. There's no assessment at all, it's for free. They took him inside, and all these beautiful rooms, they were furnished with antique furniture, modern furniture. There were DVDs, there were chandeliers, there were gold on the taps. There was these amazing full wall-size crystal sets for TV, liquid crystal sets. Every modern thing you could imagine, and antique as well. The furniture was worth a fortune. And the angel sort of gave him his card and said, here's my email number. If you want to change anything, just give me an email. SMS me and I'll change it straight away. It's heaven after all. And the angel looked at all that expensive furniture and he said, my goodness, I don't think I can afford the insurance premiums on that. And the angel said, you don't need insurance up in heaven. We don't allow thieves in here. You don't have to worry about your place getting burgled. It's for free. He took him downstairs to this triple garage. In that triple garage, there was this enormous, you wouldn't believe how big it was, SUV, this four-wheel drive vehicle. Bigger than a 3-story house. Next to that was this stretched limo, Rolls Royce. And the third car was a red Ferrari limited edition sports car with a retractable roof. In this life, he'd always wanted a sports car. But really, what's the use of a sports car when there's so many speed cameras around? But the angel said to him, you don't have to worry. There are no speed cameras up in heaven. You've died already. What's the point? And he opened the doors of the garage on the opposite side of the road was this amazing, beautiful 18-hole golf course. He'd always loved his golf in his previous life. Now he could play to his heart's content. And the angel said, you see that golf course opposite side of the road? That's been designed by Tiger Woods himself. And because it's heaven, you will notice on the greens, whichever way you putt that ball, it will always curl into the hole. It's a golfer's heaven. And the man looked at the clubhouse. That was a very elite country club. He said, even if I got elected to such a country club, I would never be able to afford the annual fees. The angel rolled his eyes and said, sir, there's no fees up in heaven. And you're already elected. It's heaven, for goodness sake. And I make sure every time you want to tee off, you'll have no queues. You can tee off whenever you want, any time of the day. It's there for you for free. And as soon as the angel left, the man started getting angry at his wife. He started scolding her and shouting at her and berating her, and she couldn't understand why. It just got up to heaven, for goodness sake. And when he managed to pause, that's what she said. Why are you getting so angry at me? You've got this beautiful house for free, this amazing furniture, and you've got your Ferrari. You can go as fast as you like. I remember you telling me how much you wanted a sports car. Now you've got one. And you always loved your golf. You've got a golf course on the opposite side of the road. Why are you angry at me? And he said, because wife. Wife, if it wasn't for all your health food, I could have been up here years ago. So why is your friend spending millions of dollars trying to stop his cancer when he could have this beautiful mansion and a red Ferrari and be playing golf all day? Now the moral of that story is that too often we're afraid of death. And that's why we spend a lot of money and we strive overmuch trying to maintain this old body instead of just letting it go. A lot of times we don't understand what's going to happen after we die. We may be a Buddhist, but we don't really believe in reincarnation. We think that's maybe just what the monks say, but who knows? That's why when you meditate, you can know for yourself, and there's no doubt anymore. Then you're not afraid of death. If you really was a Christian and you really believed 100%, you would never be afraid of death. So your friend obviously needs to understand more about rebirth. And then they would not spend so much money on that time. It is attachment to existence, craving for existence, also fear as well, a lack of knowledge. Does that sort of answer the question, sort of? And thank you for the opportunity to a lack of knowledge. Does that sort of answer the question, sort of? And thank you for the opportunity to tell my joke. The next question, there's a couple more. Yes. First one to the microphone answers the question. It's a race. Who's got it? The wavy and blue has won. Congratulations. Yes, go on.
My question is that does all the action will produce the karma? The second one is, does the enlightened person's action will produce any karma in the present and no more to be future already in the present?
Okay, does an enlightened person produce karma? Okay, karma. It's all about like wanting and doing things. Even this is an interesting point of Dhamma, which is a very fine point. I explained this in Singapore. I haven't explained it here yet. Tomorrow when I talk about the stages of enlightenment, have you ever heard, for a stream winner, you can't get reborn in the lower realms, in the hell realms, in the ghost realms, in the animal realms? Why is that? Even though they've got the karma, they've done bad karma in the past, people like Angulimala, the karma is there. Why don't they go to those realms? The reason is, and actually the reason why people go to a hell realm, isn't that really cool that people can go to these hell realms? I'll tell you the reason why they go to hell. Because they think they deserve to go. Literally, you send yourself to those hell realms. Anyone who knows psychology knows that we punish ourselves because we think we deserve to be punished. There's a lot of ego and self in that self-punishment. Very often, as a monk, we say, please forgive yourself, forgive others. You find it very hard to forgive yourself and forgive others. You know why? Because of your sense of self. The more selfless you are, the easier it is to forgive both others and yourself. When you become a stream winner and you see no self, it is absolutely easy, obvious to forgive yourself and others. Angulimala forgave himself. Because of that, would no longer need to send himself down to those hell realms. The doors of hell are always open. A person can walk out at any time. It's only they don't think they deserve to walk out, which is why they stay there. Each one of you has sometimes lived in the earthly hells. You've done something terrible you feel so guilty about, or someone else has abused you, and you put yourself in that prison. You can walk out at any time. When you forgive yourself, you can let it go. You're free. The enlightened ones know how to free themselves of the old karma. That's why, they perform karma, but they can let it go at any time. That's why the karma they perform has got no results. They let it all go, because they see non-self. Do you want to know what hell is? Sometimes people ask me that question. Are there hell realms in Buddhism? There are. And I'll tell you how you know. There's an old Zen story. I'm going to take it more deeper than is usually told. This old Zen story goes like this. We're going on a bit late, but it's a Friday. Are you working tomorrow? It's Christmas, isn't it? Yeah, okay, good. So we're going a bit later tonight. Is that okay? Okay.
This old story about this samurai warrior. Like many samurais were very spiritual, very interested in religious things. So the samurai was wanting to find out whether there really is hell and heaven. He could never get a straight answer from anybody until he went up to this old meditation monk. He saw him sitting down there, and he went up to him. The samurai drew himself up, because he was a proud warrior, and said, "Venerable sir, you are a monk. You are honest. Please tell me, yes or no, whether there is heaven and hell. If you don't know, just say you don't know. But don't lie to me." And the monk looked up and said, "You're too stupid to understand this." He'd insulted the samurai. The samurai said, "Sir, I am not stupid. I have got a great education. I've been training for many years. I am a samurai." And the monk said, "They don't make riff-raff like you into samurais." And the samurai got really upset. He said, "Venerable monk, if you don't talk nicely to me, I'll chop off your head with my sword." And the monk said, "You couldn't even slice bread with that sword." And that was it. The samurai got out of his sword and was about to strike the monk's head off when the monk looked up and said, "That's hell." And the samurai understood, which was very lucky. The monk was really pushing his luck, I think. But the samurai understood, because that degree of hatred, of wanting to kill somebody, that actually is exactly what it feels like when you're in hell. Only it keeps going on again and again, moment after moment. Vindictiveness, punishment, self-punishment, guilt. That is what hell feels like. When you have these pictures on the temple walls or descriptions of people boiling in oil, that's just some way of describing it to you about what the pain feels like. But you should know right now in your life, whenever you get that angry and that upset, if that carries on and you get reborn in that state will carry on for many, many, many thousands of years, and that's what's called hell. In the same way, you can let go of that anger at any time, let go of that vindictiveness, forgive, not have this tit for tat, they killed me, I've got to kill them. You can walk out of hell at any moment with one act of forgiveness and letting go. That's why I say the doors of hell are open. Anyway, going back to the samurai was so impressed that he went down onto his knees and he bowed to the monk. He said, "Oh, at last I've got someone who's wise, who really knows what they're talking about. Oh, you're such a great monk." And the monk looked up at him and smiled and said, "And that's heaven." Because that's what it feels like in heaven. When you're kind, when you're respectful, when you're soft and gentle. If that lasts again and again and again and again for thousands of years, that's what it feels like being up in heaven. Those states, when you leave this body, are so stable they can last a long, long time. That's what heaven is like. So that monk was incredibly smart. He wasn't just saying there's no heaven and hell except on earth. He was actually giving a description of what it's like and why it's like that. So that's why that people can relieve themselves from heaven at any time. Which is why that karma, you can actually let go of karma at any moment if you're enlightened. Okay, hope that answers the question. Yeah?
Dear Ajahn Brahm, I'd like to follow up with this question. Do you mean that before one's achieve enlightenment and see anatta, there is karma, but after one's become enlightened, there is no karma?
Okay, before enlightenment is karma, after enlightenment is karma, but you can let go of karma any time after enlightenment. So it is there, but you don't need to hold it and carry it around. You can let it go at any moment. You are free to let go. In the same way that people, something happened to you in the past, you did something wrong in the past. Why is it so hard to forgive other people? Why is it so hard to forgive yourself? If you understand the answer to that question, you understand when enlightened people find forgiveness incredibly easy. And it doesn't make sense to actually to torture yourself or torture others because of some bad deed. You just completely let go. Then there's no suffering. You let go of karma. Karma is there, but you just don't carry it around anymore. You leave it on the ground. Yes, next question.
Yesterday you mentioned that the mind, or rather the description of the mind, is perhaps the biggest thing in the world, in the whole world. And all of us here, we possess a mind, which means that everyone's mind then will be crowding everybody's mind. Or is there a mastermind, so-called perhaps the universal intelligence, that govern all the other minds that exist? My next question is, you mentioned just now that there is actually no will because there's no self. And because there's no self, there is no will. Yet, we still have the will to walk out of hell if we so choose to. How do we contradict ourselves in that area?
Okay, first of all, that you are the mastermind. That's the first question. So am I. Each one of you is the same. There is no other mastermind above your mind. You are that mastermind. All the other beings exist in your mind. Whatever you can know can fit into that mind. Therefore it's a chief. The Buddha is in your mind. Okay, sit down. I haven't answered the other question yet. The second question is about, I never said the will doesn't exist. Now please listen carefully. The will is. You can actually see it happening. You can actually experience the will. What I'm saying is the will is not caused by you. It comes from somewhere else. It's not generated by the person who goes by your name. Now that's different there. The will is there. So you will do things. You will strive. You've got no choice. The point is, you say, where did this come from? Why did I do this? Now that's where I want you to look. Now that's what we mean. There is will, but it's a process. It doesn't come from a being. Which is why when that process goes to the stage of enlightenment, the will is free to forgive and let go. Okay, get up there and ask the other question. You better stay up there just in case.
Yeah, I think I better stay here. Now, you're saying that all the mind is within our own mind. In other words, am I right to infer that it is an integration of every mind that is in our mind? We mastermind the whole thing? Or in other words, are we the total essence of all that is available?
It's interesting. I don't know if you've ever lost a loved one and you feel very sad, the whole world is sad. As far as you're concerned.
Yes.
If ever you've fallen in love, the whole world is in love. The whole world is as happy. It's interesting that the whole world is coloured by you.
So it is actually just one essence that covers everybody?
Okay, as far as you're concerned, there's just the one essence, which is your mind. Now you stick to your mind and you stop getting involved in my mind.
Next question then. You were saying something to the extent that a mind or a thought can be supplanted into another person's mind, like in psychology, in advertisement. You will see this thought being generated to somebody else, and the person is then influenced towards doing what they have actually no intention about doing. Now, if a person is aware of this technique, like what we do very much in our society today, we have what we call the neuro-linguistic programming, we have the Silva mind controlling, we've got lots of other of these hypnotic methods and techniques that you're using. Now, if we're able to use such technology, are we at free will to do that, to superimpose this thought into somebody else's mind to guide them along the way that we want them to?
I've been doing that ever since I came to KL.
We know you can do it, but can we as individuals also do the same thing?
You are doing it all the time, but sometimes we influence our friends, our relationships in wrong ways because of lack of compassion, lack of wisdom, because of delusion. So that those people who owned the Sanbuno tobacco factory, they influence me in delusive ways. But this is the point. If you have wisdom and compassion, you can teach and you can actually change people. But people with power, if they haven't got wisdom and compassion, they do influence people in wrong ways. Look how many that, they got the, rappers, like gangster rappers, and some of the lyrics which they say, they do influence people. Anyone who says that violent movies or sexual movies don't influence people, it's absolutely rubbish. They do. They have to. You know the reason why. The whole psychology behind what you see is what you imitate. You may not believe this, when I was about 17 or 18, even though I wasn't into drugs, I still had long hair, had green velvet trousers and hippie beads. Because everyone had that. But I thought I was rebelling. I thought I was being an individual. Now one day I went to one of these rock festivals in the Isle of Wight. It was very traumatic for me, because I thought I was an individual, and then I found a couple of thousand other people with green velvet trousers and long hair just like me. It was just I wasn't rebelling, it was just another uniform, that's all. I had been completely conditioned. My uniform wasn't my own choice. I had been conditioned. Why is there such a thing called fashion? You're conditioned, that's all. Yeah, go on. Yeah, you had to say that, you're conditioned to say that. Try not saying it. So you can't do it. Aha. Okay. What the Buddha taught was the unconditioned. That's not a good phrase, because this is when you call the at sankata, the at is in linguistics called a privative prefix, which means the lack of a conditioned world. When there's no conditioning there at all, then that's what he was talking about. The end of conditioning. And that's what I'm talking about now. To stop conditioning, yeah. To turn it all off. To let go. To cease. When everything disappears. There's nothing left to be conditioned. When all your will stops. So there's nothing to condition or be conditioned. Understand? No, you don't. Okay, another question. Yes, come on.
Ajahn Brahm.
Yeah.
I actually always have this confusion in myself where following the Buddhist teaching of being no self, choosing the middle path, and being irresponsible and with no goal of no, because there's no self. So what do I need to do? I don't need to care on anything.
Okay.
So can you please explain?
Yes, you have no choice except to care. You've been completely conditioned. You have to care. You have to strive. You have to be responsible. You've been completely conditioned to be so. So please, be responsible. The Buddha tells you to, so you have to follow your conditioning. Now that's it. When people try to outthink these things, they don't realize actually just what we're talking about here. There is such a thing called will. There is responsibility. There is effort. There is compassion. And you can see that happening. The point of non-self is seeing where that is coming from. This is why the Buddha's taught in the world. You know, one of the most powerful events of the Buddha's enlightenment was just after he became enlightened. He was
Brahma Sahampati came down and asked him to teach. If Brahma Sahampati hadn't given that conditioning to the Buddha would have been a Pacceka Buddha, would not have taught. At that time, after enlightenment, the will to do has been so subdued that you do need some input from outside, some seed, to get that will going again. Literally, the Buddha had no choice just after his enlightenment. He needed Brahma Sahampati, the great God Sahampati, to come down and ask him to teach. And from that we had Buddhism today. So as one of my novices in Perth said, thank God for Buddhism. God being Brahma Sahampati. God being Brahma Sahampati. Without him there would be no Buddhism. Christmas Eve, yes. It's not Christmas Eve. Now, any of you who know history know December the 25th was actually not the birth of Christ. Anyone who knows that that was not the birth, because that was Mithras Day. It was the ceremony held in Rome for this being called Mithras, which birthday was on December the 25th. Or celebration day was on December the 25th. And because it was such an important day, the Christians actually took it over and joined it with the celebration of Christmas, and it became Christmas from that time on. So tomorrow actually started off as Mithras Day. And it's very interesting actually what Mithras was. All we know about Mithras was some important being was something to do with a bull. Now, the Romans were not silly people. They had a huge empire. They were very refined, great philosophers. They wouldn't just worship a bull. They weren't animists. It must have been something more than that. What does the word Mithras mean to you? Mithras? Mitra? Maitreya? The Buddha would describe himself as one of 4 animals. One was a thoroughbred, one was a lion, one was an elephant, a naga, and the other one was a bull. Maybe December the 25th, Mithras Day, was Maitreya Day. So tomorrow, happy Maitreya Day. Go on, Thero.
Dear Ajahn Brahm, is it karma dictate our stream of consciousness? Is it karma dictate our stream of consciousness?
Is it karma dictate our stream of consciousness? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Like karma is like the banks of a river. It sort of guides the stream of consciousness. So the river can only go within those banks, but because of its flow, it can erode one bank, silt up on another bank. Actually, the karma can change. But it's the karma which is almost guiding, your life, your span of life, what happens to you in your life, like the banks of a river. So the karma is like the banks of a river guiding it. But it's a craving is like the current of the river. So it's the karma plus the craving which propels your life. And looking upon that, the stream of consciousness, like the water in the river, never the same 2 moments later, even though you may look in some sort of river, the river which is, what is the river which KL stands on, or whatever it's called? Klang, the Klang River. Look at the Klang River today, look at it tomorrow. It looks the same. But you all know that all the water has flown past from yesterday. It's completely new water. Just like your stream of consciousness. It looks the same, and the karma is guiding it. It's something called a character, a personality which you can recognize. Ajahn Brahm tells jokes. Someone else speaks like this. But, my character does change gradually every year. Like the banks of a river do change, they mutate. That's the karma. And the current which pushes your stream of consciousness, that's called craving. So that's the simile of the river. Yes, next question.
Dear Reverend, in the dependent origin, because of craving or because of attachment, there is rebirth.
Yeah.
So in a cloning cycle, when the seed does not have any karma or any attachment, how can it be formed into a human being?
Okay, what actually happens there is the person is not the body, but the body is the vehicle. So when you're cloning, you're just creating a potential place where the stream of consciousness can go and take root. So actually what happens when the craving, the attachment, the karma, the being who's just passed away can get into that clone body, into that being, and literally animate it and make it into a viable embryo which comes out of the mother's womb and then gets born. There has been some very strange cases of rebirth. And there was one which I read years ago. It was apparently repeated. What happened in 2 villages in Thailand, which are very close to each other. In the first village, a man died. About a day later, in the second village, another man died. The second man, after he died, a few hours later, he regained consciousness again. Sometimes that happens because doctors aren't all that smart, the village doctors. But when he regained consciousness, he was a completely different person and character than the person who was there in the morning. After they investigated, they found his character was a character of the person who died the day before in the other village. Eventually, that man went back to his original village. His wife had to have a man. She recognized his personality, but a completely new body. The stream of consciousness had changed. When the first person had died, the stream of consciousness had been floating around. We'd gone to the next village. The day after, this person had died, but his body was viable, and he'd gone into that body and got it going again. It was like a carjacking. So it showed actually that there was a body of many, many years old, and the stream of consciousness could actually take root in that. Very weird, but there's apparently 2 cases where it's happened. Strange, but this actually shows if there's a clone, that if that clone is still viable, all the organs are still okay, the stream of consciousness can actually go into that clone, from a previous birth or whatever, from previous life, go into that and animate that and get it going. That's how it works. Does that make sense? Okay, any other questions? Yes, please come to the microphone.
Sorry, dear Ajahn. Actually, what happened is following the thoughts of this lady here just now, talking about mind. Am I to understand that you are saying that actually this world is a void, emptiness, and then the will actually, the consciousness actually realizes itself. Therefore, all of us are actually a representative of consciousness. And what you mean by condition and destiny or stuff like that is actually being formed by interaction between 2 consciousness. And since just now the other lady was talking about Sid Baba, I would like to, maybe you can talk about what do you feel or what do you think about the claim of Jesus, since tomorrow is Christmas or so, as he's the Son of God. Will you perhaps just go a bit on it? Thank you very much.
Oh my goodness, I think I've forgotten the first part of the question. Something to do about consciousness and will or something. Maybe the second part of the question, first of all, about Jesus. Basically, we don't know exactly who Jesus was and what he did, because sometimes the stories have been changed for such a long time, simply because that for Christianity it's been involved with so many very powerful regimes, either sort of Constantine's Christian empires, the Christian empires, the Holy Roman empires, the popes. And so we haven't really had an opportunity to really know exactly what happened. However, that was it 1940 or something? If anyone is interested in this, should actually go and read what's called the Nag Hammadi Library, the Gnostic Gospels, which are on the internet. You can look at them there. They're fascinating teachings, because these were teachings which you don't see in the Bible. They're supposed to be sayings of Jesus Christ, but they're sayings such as, "He who knows themselves knows the truth of all things." Very, very Buddhist sayings. And these are part of the Gnostic Gospels. If anyone has researched the history of Christianity, that just after the death of Jesus Christ, there were 3 strands of Christianity. There was Jewish Christianity, which was just Judaism, no different. And that seemed to be the one which Jesus preferred. Because he said that I do not come to abolish the law, I come to fulfill the law, being the Jewish law. And that was basically destroyed in 70 AD when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. And there that church vanished. And then for a couple of centuries, the 2 strands of the church, the Christian church, were vying for supremacy. One was the Gnostic Christians, who did not have any structure, any authority structure, were completely individualistic, where gnosis is the same word as jnana, individual understanding, liberation, through spiritual practices. And those Gnostic Gospels survived. So there was Gnostic Christianity, and the other one was the Roman Christianity, centered on the center of the empire, which at that time was Rome, because that's where Peter went to. And those 2 parts of Christianity were vying for supremacy for many years. Because of the organization of Roman Christianity, that gained supremacy. And eventually the Gnostic Christianity was suppressed. But whenever you suppress something, always there's some traces left. And it was in 1940, or somewhere around that, they found these ancient papyrus scrolls in the town in Lower Egypt called Nag Hammadi, where they have sayings of Jesus Christ, which are not in the Bible, and they're very interesting to read. Much closer to Buddhism. And it's wrong to think there was much of a separation. It's something which deserves some scholarship, which is this. There was in the town of Alexandria, the city of Alexandria, which was the port city of Egypt, in the time of 2,000 years ago, it was Alexandria was the main city of Egypt. It was the capital. That's where people like Antony and Cleopatra lived. That was the main town. Cairo was probably a small village at that time. Alexandria was a place of importance. And it was a Greek historian called Philo of Alexandria, around 60 AD. Where was it that time? No, I think it was before then. I think it was about sort of 10 or 11 AD or something. He did a report of the town of Alexandria, and he mentioned that in Alexandria there was a monastery of Therapeutae. And he only described a little bit about these monks, having bald heads and being vegetarians and being celibate. There were no Jewish sects like that. Judaism always enforced that men would get married. There was no Christianity then. There was no monasticism at that time. So many scholars wondered where the heck did these Therapeutae get their lineage from. At the same time, in Alexandria, in that time, there are ancient maps of the town. Those maps show part of Alexandria had an Indian quarter. There were Indians living in Alexandria at the time. These were what we call these days expatriate traders. There was trade between India and Alexandria. The trade would actually go from the port of Soparaka in the west of India across the Persian Gulf, actually going from port to port, up the Red Sea, past the ancient port of Aden,
That was such an old port. They would stop in there and then go up the Red Sea. After the Red Sea, they'd make the short trip overland to Alexandria. And from there, they'd trade to the whole of Europe. And the trade would go back again to India. That's a fact. At that time, 2,000 years ago, the dominant religion in India was Buddhism. Just like the Sri Lankan Viharas here in Malaysia. Where did they come from? The Sri Lankan expatriates who came to Malaysia to work for the British. They brought their monks with them. You have the Hindu temples. Where did they come from? The Hindu Indians, when they came to Malaysia to work, they brought their monks with them too. It doesn't take much of a guess to know those Indian expatriates in Alexandria would have brought their monks with them as well. The Theraputai. Linguistics have very easily made a connection. Thera, Putai. The P's, the B's and the V's are interchangeable. The T's become D's. Theraputai is very easily linked to Theravada. Vegetarians, brown-robed, bald-headed, celibates. It's a dead giveaway for Theravada monks in Alexandria at the time of the birth of Jesus Christ. Those of you who've been to Christian schools, what happened in the history of Jesus Christ? After he was born, there was the persecution of Herod, and the whole family moved where? Not to India. Oh, you spoiled the narrative there. I was getting people really worked up. It was to Egypt. The whole family, Jesus grew up in Egypt. And it never said where in Egypt, but any refugee, they always go to the capital cities. It's a dead giveaway that Jesus grew up in Alexandria. And if there was a Theravada Buddhist monastery in Alexandria, would have gone to it, wouldn't he? Now, that's starting to be interesting, doesn't it? And one of the famous Christians was a fellow called Origen, who was also from Alexandria. And he was one of the founders of Christianity. They say he put Christianity into a strong philosophical framework based on the Greek philosophy. In fact, that when I went to visit Cambridge last time, I went into my old college of Emmanuel College. I think there was somebody here from Emmanuel talking to me the other day. That in the chapel, they have, in the glass windows, have about 4 famous Christians. Origen is one of them. His teacher was someone called Ammonius Saccas. Ammonius Saccas. S-A-K-K-A. Ammonius. The historians can't work out who this teacher could be. Origen was probably one of the most famous Christians at that time. And he couldn't work out, no one knows, they can't find out any mention of a famous teacher called Ammonius Saccas. When I heard that, straight away, I figured out who that guy was. Sometimes we have, like Chinese names, you have the surname first and the other names afterwards. In English, we have the other way around. We have the first names first, surnames afterwards. That's very common. So turn it around. Instead of Ammonius Saccas, say Saccamonius. Got it? Sakyamuni. Okay, I've got the thing about the clock here. So, the Buddhism was around at that time, much more than we thought. So perhaps it is true. Tomorrow is Maitreya Day, the time of peace and goodwill to all people. Who cares whether it's Christmas Day, Maitreya Day, if it's a good day where we practice contentment, peace, happiness, tolerance, compassion, it's a wonderful day. And out of compassion for the organisers who've got to lock up this temple, I'd better stop now, otherwise I might sort of end up on the crucified. No, I shouldn't say things like that. I may end up with big trouble. So let's actually pay respects by sharing the merits with all sentient beings. And thank you for coming today. Idammen yatinang hotu sukhita hontu yatayo. Idammen yatinang hotu sukhita hontu yatayo. Idammen yatinang hotu sukhita hontu yatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Very good.